morning and welcome back to Hope Wednesday. We are in the 8th month of the year. Oh my goodness, time has really been moving fast. It's like June just kind of hunked. I saw a post that said June was very disrespectful because it just blew its horn. It didn't even come in the house. I really feel like that's just the days we're living in, and that June, July, all of these months are going to fly by. And before you know it, we will wake up and we will be ready for the holidays. And I just hope that you're maximizing your time and that you're getting the most out of this year. And we have dedicated this year to children, changing the narrative and healing from unauthorized sex and sexual trauma. It was my endeavor to draw attention to how impacting sexual trauma and unauthorized sex is. I dedicated it. This is our 8th month of just looking at how disturbing and disrupting sexual activity with children and unauthorized sex is. So let me pray before I go into it too much more. Lord, thank you for this month of August. Thank you for just allowing us to share this word and just to focus on it. Lord, I pray that someone hears this word. I pray that someone is delivered and that someone moves in the path of deliverance from their sexual trauma and from any unauthorized sex that they may have encountered. Lord, I pray that this word would go out and bless everyone who hears it and cause them to want abundant life, a better life, a clean life, just a guilt-free life, a shame-free life. In Jesus' name, amen. All righty, you all. I'm so excited about the fact that we are reaching out and we are touching people and starting the conversation, because in the African American community, discussions about sex rarely take place. You know, this is a topic that's under the rug and we don't talk about it, and we just kind of know that something's happening in our families, but we don't discuss it. From the church house to our house, these crimes, the White House, all of our houses, these crimes are taking place against children, and people are participating in unauthorized sex, which further complicates relationships. And I'm here that we might have good relationships with God, ourselves, and other people. That is the scope of my profession, that I help people improve their relationships. And nothing dismantles relationships like sexual trauma and sexual abuse and even unauthorized sex. So today this month we're going to look at remapping sex maps. And I want you to look at it from this perspective or through this lens, investigating the person you're with and yourself as well. But I added investigating your partner because we seem to be a little bit more motivated when we're looking at someone else's issues than we are taking a look at ourselves. So this will allow you to just kind of place markers on behaviors and begin the conversation and begin to look at how can I remap my love map. Now, this is just a little something I wrote to start with to get the ball rolling. I said, sex left in the hands of a child master is dangerous. Sex left in the hands of a child master is dangerous. Left in the hands of an adult master with evil intentions and a childlike appetite is lethal. So sex, when left in the hands of a child who is the master, it's dangerous because children are not responsible. Children don't have the cognitive insight to do what's right. They don't have moral judgment. Their insight is off. And really, as I stated, they shouldn't be dealing with issues of sex to begin with. So sex is off the table for children, so of course they're going to mismanage it. Now, sex left in the hands of an evil adult, well, that's just lethal because they become the prey. They have a child appetite, but they have an adult evil that causes them to prey on people and to disadvantage people. So that's the challenge we're having. And we know that when adults have childlike mindsets but evil intentions, we know that when they are into pedophilia or when their love maps are vandalized, meaning that they're just messed up, then they hurt children. And the cycle of hurt begins because first it's the appetite. They have this insatiable appetite because their love maps are remembering how in their childish ways, how they were sexually stimulated by a child or as a child. So they have that hunger and drive and that memory that forces them to reenact. But then they have the shame that comes along with it because they are adults. And they know that what they've done is wrong. And sometimes to cover up even the criminality, not even the shame. Some people don't have shame. They just have fear that they will go to jail. So they, they hurt children, or they end up maybe even killing the child or their victim so that they don't have to face the ramifications of their behaviors. So it is really serious that we begin to look at how to remap the sex maps of our children and adults, because God intended for us to have healthy sex maps. But because of the fall, because of Adam and Eve, this is a Christian site, I have to say it, tell it like it is. With the fall came a disrupted or a vandalized sex map. The route to sex in God's order was disrupted by man's fleshly desires, corrupted desires. So if God set up, man set down. And that's what we're looking at, even in the sphere of developing a sexual map that tells us what is appropriate, what drives us, and how do we get there? How do we get to pleasure? And unfortunately, when people have vandalized sex maps, they're trying to get to an undisclosed, an abandoned, dark location. But the objective is, when I get there, there's pleasure. There is dopamine. There's chemicals released in my mind that are prompted by my sexual activity with a child or unauthorized sex with the same sex or whatever. So your mind remembers it. And the brain is really strong and positive and unique, I should say, about remembering pathways. So how the brain fires together, it wires together. So emotions and actions, they go together. So when you experience sexual activity and the pleasures come along with it, you continue to want to move in that direction. And so that's how fetishes are developed, and that's how pedophilia is developed, because you remember that if I do this, I get this pleasure. Now, in the course of that, conviction, judgment, consciousness, it's absent, because all you're looking at is how to get to pleasure. What road will lead me to pleasure? And whether it is masturbation, whether it is same sex, whether it's sex with a child, whether it's sex with someone who is already in a marriage or something, whatever it is, however you train your brain to experience sex and pleasure, the pleasure wraps itself around your actions, and it causes you to have now a tight memory of action and pleasure. So whenever you remember the action, the pleasure is right beside it. And when you remember the pleasure, the action comes alongside. So you see how you kind of knit those two actions, those two things together? And we want to understand that it is important that we are doing right things and attaching pleasure to right things, so that when we do something right, we remember pleasure, or we remember pleasure and we remember the right thing to do. So again, I know this is getting kind of tricky, and I want to keep this basic because this is just our conversation, but I'll slow it down again because it's very important that we get this. And maybe it's simple to you, but in my mind, it's just a lot of different things going on, and I want to make sure I convey this salient point to you. If you were sexually abused as a child, that's the action. And if there was bodily sensation of pleasure outside of your moral capacity to say it's right or wrong, just your body responding to how it feels, now what happens is the sexual memory, which is having sex with an adult as a child or having sex with a child as a child, that pleasure wraps itself with it, and these two become co-joined. And so whenever you have a memory of sexuality, you have the pleasure that goes with it. And when you are reminded about sex, or something comes up for you of the pleasure, you see sex or you get a bodily sensation, the action is tied together. So that is what we call, and that's what we reference, the sex map. And it's important that you know that, because every action you're mapping and you're connecting actions and emotions, and even on some level, the third, which is a spirit, a demonic evil spirit. So you have the action, the cognition, the thoughts, and the pleasure, and then you have the evil spirit that continues to influence you. So these three are wrapped together, and even biblically it says that a three-cord strand is not easily broken. Well, so it is when those three things get together. It is difficult to dismantle the love map. But the beautiful thing is, if you have sexuality, cognition, and emotions and God, you can remap it. And that's what we're going to talk about as well. So some of the things that happen in the course of developing a sex map, all of your experiences, whether it was playing house, whether it was someone coming in your room late at night, or whether it is just blatant someone molesting or raping you, those experiences, they form together and they shape direction in your mind. When you think about pleasure, you'll know how to get there. If Pleasure Island is here, then you'll remember that this is how I got to Pleasure Island as a child. I had unauthorized sex, or I was with someone and we were doing things that we shouldn't have done, but it led us to Pleasure Island. And so even if it is, like, again, inappropriate activity, most people are driven in trying to get to Pleasure Island. How do you get to Pleasure Island? How does your partner get to Pleasure Island? And what direction do they take? The direction they take is predicated on all the experiences they had from childhood, teenage, and even to adult. And so you're looking at the activity of your mate or even yourself, and you're maybe not even paying close attention to it, but it's worth paying attention to. Like, where do they go? Like, what route do they take to get to Pleasure Island? Some people take pedophilia and attraction to children to get to Pleasure Island. Some people take just dark, secret, down low and night creepers and all of those different things. They like secret sex. They like to be in relationships with people on the down low, whether it's male to male or woman and male, female and male. They just learn that the road to pleasure is through secrecy, right? And so it's important that we understand how people are mapped, what direction they take to get to Pleasure Island. There's nothing wrong with Pleasure Island except how you get there. And some people they just have a very diabolical or perverted way of getting to Pleasure Island. And the way that they get to Pleasure Island is they had to have experienced the route. Usually they have someone that comes in that's older than them, or that has been exposed to Pleasure Island, and they take them there via the way that they've learned, right? So they're experimenting, they're on this path, and they're traveling, and they're doing all of these different activities to get to Pleasure Island. And the brain's job is to bring pleasure, to reduce stress, and the way it does it is by memory. So it takes snapshots, it records. This is what you did to get to Pleasure Island when you were little. This is what you did to get to Pleasure Island when you were a teenager. This is what you did to get to Pleasure Island when you were in that with those people or with that person. The brain has memory, and it attaches, like I stated earlier, the memory with the experience. The map and the emotion go together. So as you're driving, trying to get to Pleasure Island, it's almost like the dopamine is released and you're being aroused, and you are motivated to drive in that direction because on Pleasure Island is reward, right? And the thing about it is, on Pleasure Island, it's where you have your pleasure, but it's not where you are held accountable for your behavior. So most people just kind of alienate the Pleasure Island, and they're preoccupied with getting to Pleasure Island. Now, people who are preoccupied with getting to Pleasure Island, or people who are stuck in their vandalized sex map rotation, or with their faulty directions to Pleasure Island, what can happen is that you can be arrested in your development. And so if there's trauma associated with that, if you were abused, and if you were, didn't necessarily consent in a way, because remember, children cannot consent, you can have arrested development. The trip could have been so traumatizing. The trip to Pleasure Island could have been so traumatizing that emotionally you shut down, and cognitively you shut down. And now you don't have the emotional maturity to manage sex as an adult. So your sexual functioning level will be at the age that it was when you first encountered the sexual abuse. It will be at that level. And so you can meet people who are adults, but they're still in that sexual area. They are arrested in their development. Case in point, we are finding more teachers. We are finding even police chiefs, pastors who have a addiction to sleeping with young children. Their love maps are vandalized. They're just distorted and just perverted. The road they're taking to Pleasure Island is perversion. And so they continue to have that road to Pleasure Island. And even if they're married and they learn a new route through marriage, it doesn't disrupt the map that they have of going there with sex with children or sex as a child. And so in their immaturity, they never destroy this map or reroute or destroy this pathway and just align themselves with another pathway. And that's why you have stories. One particular story of a teacher who had began dating a sixth grader. And she went to jail. She eventually had 2 kids by him, and she died. She was an older woman. But what happened in that is that she could work. She was married herself. She had other children. So she was married with a husband. So she knew how to get to Pleasure Island with her spouse. But her love map, her primary love map, was connected to sex and connection as a child. So she was connecting with that young man in her arrested sexual development age. So it may have been in elementary. She may have been 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 when it happened, 13. And so chronologically, it made sense for her because emotionally, and her emotionally sex maturity was at that level. So she was attracted to someone that age. Now, remember, we do have evil people who are attracted to children to exploit them. And that's not the same as arrested of development. That's exploitation. And that's a different type of evil where they are not falling in love necessarily, but they want to exploit, and they usually end up harming the child. So that's a different map where you learn pleasure and violence. That's Pleasure Island and Violent Island, where they're kind of co-joined together. And interestingly, as a pause, they found that when you watch pornography, there is a connection with violence and pornography. So that violent island is there too. And so we want to be careful that we understand the arrested development. Yes, they can be a teacher, they can be a pastor, they can be mature, they can have 800 credit score, and they can be a Boy Scout leader, and they can have all of this morality. But in the area of sexuality and sex, where they have arrested development, they are still dysfunctional and they are still operating as a child with a child vandalized sex map. Their directions are skewed. And so, and the brain is just constantly reminding them, go this way, go this way, go this way. And they go that way. With the influence of the enemy, they go that way. And so that becomes a habit. We are creatures of habit. And whenever it has to do with pleasure and the release of oxytocin and all of those endorphins and all of those beautiful chemicals, it just seduces us and it makes us hungry or crave the chemical release in our brain and in our body. So we're living by the chemical releases in the physical sensation of our body. That is the essence of a child. Now, is it okay? Remember, we talked about Pleasure Island as a healthy place. And when we're seeking Pleasure Island as a healthy adult with a healthy love map, we're just not going to Pleasure Island for pleasure. We're going there for connection. We're going there to be close to our mate, for intimacy. And the result is that we get pleasure. So it kind of reframes Pleasure Island as a result of Intimacy Island. So when you're an adult with a healthy love map, you reframe it to Intimate Island that affords pleasure. Whereas when you have an unhealthy love map, you just call it Pleasure Island because there is no intimacy, there is no healthy attachment, but there is only pleasure. It is only pleasure. It's very animalistic in nature. It's debased. It's just cause and effect, just pleasure, just action and pleasure, and it has nothing to do with morality. So that I hope that's kind of giving you an idea of what happens when there's arrested development and you become just addicted to the route of getting to Pleasure Island as a child. And children shouldn't drive. And directions, oh my goodness, they shouldn't be responsible for direction. So along with arrested development, I found interesting that they have a term called the Peter Pan syndrome. So the Peter Pan syndrome is just that you are not able to control your sensations and you don't want responsibility. You just want to be a child and you just want to play forever. If you remember Peter Pan on the island with his friends, he wasn't being responsible. He wasn't trying to be a husband. He wasn't being a father. He had friends and he was being a child and he was on an adventure and life was good. He, wasn't like a 9 to 5. He wasn't being sacrificial and serving and doing all the things that God has designed men to do, but he was enjoying himself. It would be like our Peter Pans of today who just want to play video games and who just want to hang out with their friends and they're not interested in getting married. They just want to live with their parents forever and they don't want the responsibility and they don't control their sensations. If they want to just have sex and not be married and just masturbate and watch pornography, that is part of the Peter Pan syndrome. We know that Michael Jackson was accused of having the Peter Pan syndrome because he just wanted to have Neverland, wherever it was called. He had toys, animals. He just wanted to relive his childhood. And so that can be the result, again, of trauma. I'm not saying Michael Jackson was sexually abused, but there's other traumas that could cause you to be arrested in your development and your ability to make good decisions and your ability to have healthy attachment. And if you don't have healthy attachment, it's going to impact your sex map. Because you won't understand that the first the first stop to Pleasure Island is healthy attachment. And so to have healthy attachment, you have to be able to attach, you have to be emotionally mature, cognitively mature. And if you're not, and if you're disconnected and if you're anxious and you don't feel connected, then that puts you on the pathway of just having sex without the desire to connect. So again, arrested develop, it's when you have a frozen development at the age of the traumatic experience. So if you were 6 and you were removed suddenly out of your parents' care, and now you're in this foster care, and you don't have the emotional capacity to deal with the pressure of missing your family, being afraid, because children are not supposed to be exposed to those extreme emotions. So it becomes traumatic. And what they do is they split. They emotionally encapsulate that emotional development. They emotionally are stunted, and that is encapsulated and frozen while they chronologically grow. They may get taller, they may be mature in other areas, but they never learned how to emotionally deal with feelings and big circumstances. And you can replace that with anything. If you were sexually abused, you didn't have the emotional maturity to deal with the sadness, the shame, and the anger, and the loss, and all of those confusing feelings. So what happens is that you become frozen at that age. And it makes it difficult because you are stuck right there, and everything you know about sex is stuck right there. So the thing is that we have to remember is moving forward and being unstuck. That is going to be a process of development and changing your attachment style, and first being aware of what has happened to you and acknowledging, I was arrested at this age. And you can ask yourself, looking back at the trauma and looking back at traumatic things that happened in your life, big emotional events, things that stimulated a big emotional responses. How did I handle that? Because if you look at that and you look at how you handle things today, it's probably paralleled. It's probably the same. And it's not your fault. It's nothing to be ashamed of. But if you're not able to manage your emotions, it comes from somewhere. Because as you were growing up, you were supposed to emotionally mature. But in trauma, the fear of just that emotion makes you not want to feel it all. So you just kind of shut the door on emotions. And although they seep out, your desire is not to deal with them. So that's really important. And so when you're dealing with someone who has someone who deals with pedophilia, that is either arrested development or the evil intentions of adults that I talked about. Sometimes it could be that they were sexually abused and so their love map is twisted, but sometimes pedophilia can be about just wanting to enslave and to harm children. And the pleasure comes from the harming, not necessarily just the sexual activity, but being empowered and having subjects and just having that ability to have authority over someone who's smaller than you. So that's the two kind of evils that we have to look at. And I'm not focusing on that as much. That's psychopathic pedophilia. And the criminal, it's both are criminal, but that is definitely another episode and another conversation that we probably in the future can touch on. But I want to get back to this and the remapping and the of the sex maps and the arrested development. The tricky thing that happens in the arrested development is that you can become accustomed to and so familiarized with this type of treatment and activity that it becomes a way of attachment and connection. There's a term called Stockholm Syndrome, and we can use it for this because initially, follow me. Initially, you may have been drug in the car and taken to Pleasure Island and abused. But what happens over the course of time, because you're a child and you don't have judgment or insight, and you're just looking at the sensation of your brain is remembering the human connection and the pleasure, and it could be splitting. Part of you don't like it, part of you feel like it's not good, but then there is a part of you that your body is responding to, and so you begin to have an attraction or have a connection with the person who is taking you to Pleasure Island, the Pleasure Island of sexual abuse, the Pleasure Island that is not healthy. And so, and you may feel like I am guilty or something's wrong with me because I got in the car. At first, they took me in the car and took me to Pleasure Island, but then I became a willing participant, or I sent cues that I want to go to Pleasure Island. And so that becomes really confusing as well, where now you have an affinity, you've drawn a relationship with the person who is taking you to Pleasure Island and causing these distorted love map connections, bonds to build. And you have to forgive yourself. You have to get to the place where you can go to therapy, and you as an adult can look at you as a child and get information as an adult to bring back to your child and let that child know that you were disorganized in your behavior and in your direction because you were a child and you should have never been on the road, or you should have never visited Pleasure Island. And so now you have to remap, and you have to reframe, and you have to change renew your mind, as the Bible would say. But the first step is just identifying that sometimes you get a connection to the person who took you to Pleasure Island, and it could have been a family member, a sibling, a cousin, a neighbor, a coach, a pastor, and it's very natural to build connection with someone that you're traveling with. Even when you're doing something wrong, you could share shame, you can share secrecy, and that bond makes you feel even more connected. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case, but in a lot of cases, that is the case. More so when the person is violent, beating you, and just not showing love. That's different, and that goes with that other psychopathic pedophilia type of thing we talked about. But for most people, they experience that interaction in a way that can be so confusing, because on Sunday, he's your pastor. On Monday through Sunday, or he's your father, or he's your sibling. So it's not always a bad relationship. It confuses that I enjoy this person or I love this person. But sometimes we go to Pleasure Island, and now we share guilt and shame, and we share secrecy, because pedophilia is always, that type of pedophilia or unauthorized sex, it's always connected to secrecy. It's always connected to secrecy, and you are sometimes secretly bound together by your secrets. People who hold secrets are secretly bound together. And the moment one person breaks the secret, it breaks the bond. And that can be part of the treatment that we talk about, or remapping later. But it's thick, because how do you disconnect from someone that you love, even though you're going to Pleasure Island inappropriately, and you should not be going to Pleasure Island? How do you break that connection? Because in your mind, you may feel like, if I don't go to Pleasure Island with this person, I may not be able to go to Disneyland with this person, or I may not be able to go to summer camp, church with this person, or I may not be able to play games, or watch TV, or go to the store and get candy, or any of those things. So it kind of gets interconnected, and it gets very convoluted and confusing, because maybe you are starting to feel guilty about the Pleasure Island, but the relationship is so interconnected that you didn't know how to say, I think it's wrong to go to Pleasure Island with you. Pleasure Island is for it's actually intimate island for married people, and pleasure is the result of intimacy. And so I'm learning, and I think it's wrong. A lot of people don't get the courage to report or to tell because because of the Stockholm, you become connected to your abuser or your captor. And it's just confusing because your body is sending you the most confusing messages, and that your body is aroused and enjoying the pleasure. And so it's so confusing, and the directions are so confusing that it's hard to remap and go another direction when the motivation to go to Pleasure Island becomes so enticing and so motivating, because now we're looking at relationship. Now we're looking at preserving someone's secrets and their status and your status, and avoiding shame, and avoiding breaking up a family, and avoiding someone going to jail. So all of these things continue to draw you to Pleasure Island inappropriately. And not to mention, you have physical urges. Your body remembers touch, what feels good, massages, sexuality, all of that. And your body is indiscriminate. Your body doesn't say, this doesn't feel good because I don't like the person doing it. You have to really cognitively have master over your mind and say, I don't like the person doing it, so I'm going to be disgusted and grossed out, and I'm not going to like it. But once you have allowed, or not knowing you have to do that, and it just happened and pleasure came with it, it becomes more difficult to master the pleasure response. So it is more difficult than we like to believe, and we want people to change. Just change. Why don't you just change? And you're perverted and you're this. And we don't understand how their brain has been wired for sexual immorality and perversion. We don't understand that, and it doesn't make excuses for it, because we do have to reroute and we have to remap if we're going to be healthy and if we're going to serve the Lord. But there takes sensitivity of understanding the years of patternistic behaviors and undoing these patterns and these core beliefs. Then you have core belief systems about it, because in order to keep going to Pleasure Island inappropriately, you start to bring ideas to your mind that, oh, it's okay, everybody does it. Oh, I'm just going to do it this one time. Or, oh, they really love me. Or, oh, it's just our little secret, our little game. So you make excuses. I can't help it. Or all of these things become thoughts that you use to beat back your conscience. It becomes the things you use to deal with the cognitive dissonance. You come up with excuses and reasons and promises and bargaining, like, I'm not going to do it anymore, and this is our last time going to Pleasure Island with this person. And it is that you are in addiction. Your brain is seeking to travel to an inappropriate, undisclosed location because there's something there for it. It is getting pleasure. It is getting connection on some level. It is, in many cases, repeating prior behaviors. And so it is satisfying the brain's desire to be in habituation and be in habit, because you know what to expect in habit. We are creatures of habit. And then there's the pleasure component. And we start to, and you can use that as a place to relieve anxiety, a place to feel important and seen. If you're only seen and you only feel good during this trip to Pleasure Island, then now you add another wire together that I feel important, I feel loved, I feel seen, I feel cared for on this trip to Pleasure Island and on Pleasure Island. So there's many complexities. And that's why I said sex is not for kids, because it's too much to sort out. You got adults who can't sort out going to Pleasure Island with unauthorized sex, because so many things start to happen. He paid me attention. He called me. He bought me a burger. He bought me a movie. He bought me a bag. He sent for me. All of these things become attached to the trip to Pleasure Island and what happens on Pleasure Island. He paid attention to me. I made him feel good. He made me feel good. And so that becomes the motivation to continue unauthorized sex and traveling to Pleasure Island. Y'all, I hope y'all can hear how difficult it's been. I've been rattling on and trying to help y'all understand how the love maps get vandalized and get so confused and you can't even understand or read it right, and you're just traveling by cognitive memory and you're going there and you don't even know. Right now, I could give you an example. I was traveling here and I'm in the process of relocating, and I have relocated, my first step in relocating, and I drove right past my exit because I'm on a new route, right? And I'm used to just driving or not driving. But in yesterday, more specifically, coming from church, I wanted my husband to turn right because that's where our home was. So we have memory and we just automatically want to go in that direction without being conscious of it. So when you're acting out and when you're getting to Pleasure Island and you're doing this thing, sometimes you do it even unconsciously. It just becomes habitual, and you don't even, like riding a bike, you don't even think about it. And so what I'm asking us to do in our next session is to think about, how am I getting to Pleasure Island, and making the decision of, do I want to keep going? How? And then for those of you who decide, I don't want to continue going there and having generational patterns of sexual abuse and taking somebody else there, because we're good at showing someone the way. Either we show them as children through sexual experimenting, playing house, playing whatever, doctor, or we become adults and we feel like we need to show other young people how to get to Pleasure Island because we've been there, we go there, so we want to keep the dysfunction going. And sometimes we can't help. Like I said, it becomes a habit, but keeping the habit going. But this is an opportunity for us to decide, for you to decide, do I want to keep making this trip? Is there another island? Do I have to do this? Do I want my grandchildren, children, friends, and family to continue to go this direction? If I don't, I have to learn a different direction. And I have to become an advocate of a different direction. And I have to explore that and teach people that there is intimate island. And guess what, y'all? Pleasure is there. Pleasure, godly pleasure without remorse. The blessings of the Lord maketh rich, add no sorrow is there. It is there. And there is another path. There is another direction. And you get to change your inner sexual map. But the first step is wanting to. Well, actually, let me break that up. The first step is awareness. Anything I said to you today rings a bell, and I know it's a hard topic. You might have to breathe through it. But if we're going to change the condition and the abuse in our world and in our families and our nation, we're going to have to start looking at sex maps and how to remap them and understanding them. And while we understand them, we still going to call the police on you and we still going to hold you accountable. We feel sorry for your trauma, but this is a call to get help so that the police won't get involved and your family members won't get involved and you pay the ultimate price for traveling to Pleasure Island with children. This is a call. This is a call. If you want to have a healthy marriage and a healthy relationship and you want to stop traveling to Pleasure Island and learn how to connect with your person, because if you are addicted to Pleasure Island, you will go there with more than just a married person, your married spouse. The drive will be, I just got to get there. I got to get there. I got to get there. Even if I go by myself in masturbation, I've got to get to Pleasure Island. So Pleasure Island is for all of those who are operating in unauthorized sex, not married to a wife, a male and a female, having sex with children, having same-sex encounters, having sex with animals. If I left anything out, you let me know. But that is all on Pleasure Island. Tell somebody, I don't want to go to Pleasure Island no more. And I don't want to go to Pleasure Island. I want to go to Intimate Island because there is pleasure, attachment, and healthy relationships there. God bless you.